Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you to the fifth installment of the Responsible Conduct of Research Workshop series. We have Dr. Peter Elkin with us here today, who is going to talk a lot of data safety and data management. And I do want to tell you that we do have one more workshop in the series, and that is next Monday, and it has to do with confidentiality. And we also have one more in our scientific communication workshop series, which is tomorrow. And it's at the same time, and it's communicating research to everyone and how to do so. And finally, I'm going to place in the chat a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to place in the chat information on our workshops. And then I'm also going to place information on our micro-credential and responsible research that you can also do. So please take a look at those. I'll put those in the chat in a minute. And I do want to introduce Dr. Peter Elkin, Professor and Chair, Department of Biomedical Informatics, and Professor of Internal Medicine. And he is with the Jacobs School of Medicine, and he has done a lot with us, and he is actually a very good presenter and knows quite a lot about this. And I think you're going to enjoy this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you. I'm here to talk about the responsible data management. I'm from the Department of Biomedical Informatics here at the Jacobs School. And thank you for having me speak today. I have no conflicts of interest with this talk. Learning objectives are to understand how to ethically handle data, to understand one's responsibility with respect to research data, to understand what constitutes unethical data management, and to understand HIPAA and the consequences of unethical data management, to understand the fair data principles, and to understand what constitutes ethical data reporting. So Hippocrates, way back when, stated that when in conjunction with my professional service, or not in conjunction with it, I see or hear in the life of men which ought not to be spoken of abroad, I will not divulge, as reckoning that all such should be kept secret. This is a little bit of old Englishy way of saying it, but it says that what you hear about patient data, you can't divulge. And there's actually laws about it, and we'll talk about them. So let's first start with unethical data management. We'll go through a number of different things: fabricated data, biased data, phishing to find positive results, not publishing negative results, unauthorized release of protective health information, and we'll talk a lot about HIPAA, merged unrelated data, splitting one's data record into two research IDs, using unreliable data to try to generate reliable results, and laptops, and how we have to be careful about any kind of portable data store. So fabricated data. So there's an increased pressure on faculty to publish and obtain grants. Many trials prove that interventions do not work. Recruitment to clinical trials is hard and often behind. Retention in clinical trials is also an issue. And remember, your word is your bond. So don't publish anything that you don't know to be true. So this is a paper that was published in Diabetes, a very high impact journal, and it linked fetal microbiome to obesity and been retracted afterward when it became clear that the co-authors faked some of their data. So in the published retraction, it said that to produce the final results, the false data were submitted to obtain further grants for research. Concluded, cited by Potty, that 6 of the 33 patients responded favorably to a test when only 4 patients were enrolled in the trial. None of them responded positively. And even though this was printed in Diabetes, the retraction was printed in New England Journal, Nature Medicine, and JAMA. That's supposed to be JAMA. And so much higher impact journals covered the retraction than covered the original paper. So biased methods. So how does this happen? Well, you choose your population on which to intervene, and that can sometimes not be unbiased. Choosing the control set may not be unbiased. Non-randomized trials, unblinded tools. Some statistical methods are more sensitive than others, so picking a very sensitive statistical method might indeed give you different results than if you picked an easier method to use that may have gotten you positive results. And type 1 error creeps into protocols. Type 1 error is error based on chance alone, and we'll talk a little bit more like about this fishing for positive results where the study was not architected or powered to come up with that outcome. So if you look at that, there's the population, and your sample can be a poor reflection of this, right? It can be only a subset of that population, not be reflective of the whole. And you think about it, there's lots of different ways this matters. So if this is the entire population, you may have a sampling frame that you looked at, a sample that you got, a response error in the actual response. And so some of these are quite different, and you could get quite different results. So error due to phishing to find positive results. Uh, what happens when researchers get data and the main outcomes don't show statistically significant results? Well, often they'll say things like, let's see what we can make of the data that we do have. Well, that can be problematic because you're trying to use one design to answer a question that requires a different design. And you're trying to answer a question in a subgroup analysis that perhaps your study wasn't designed or powered to answer. And often people are, if you ask enough questions, you may get positive results based on chance alone and maybe ignoring this feature. So, of course, not publishing negative results, and I'll let you read the cartoon. It's kind of funny. I'm not going to read cartoons to you. So, obviously, it's really important that we publish our negative results because it turns out that that it informs science. So it tells people what not to do and what they should not be looking for in their data. So if you actually look at strong results, they're much more often published and much more often published in high impact journals. If you look at mixed results, it's mixed results, but they're still good publishing. If you get negative results, they hardly ever get published. 2/3 of the time, nobody sees that article at all. And that's wrong. It's bad for science, and there's a big push uh, of uh, of journal editors to accept negative trials because of this. So HIPAA is a very important law that you need to understand, and this talks about it's the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. This is came out in 2009, and what it does is it stipulates and as well as other things, the penalties for divulging information that is sensitive health information. And covered entities that experience more than a breach affecting more than 500 residents of a state or jurisdiction, in addition to notifying the affected individuals, are required to provide public notice in prominent media outlets serving in that state and or jurisdiction. So it's a very bad thing, and you just don't want it. Meanwhile, you can be charged up to, I think it's 1.9 million per physician, and up to maybe $50,000 per episode um, uh, for a breach per patient. So and it's capped, but it's capped at a pretty high amount. And this is your personal liability, not the institution's. So merging unrelated data, how many John Smiths do you have in your population? The error rate in ICD codes is between 23 and 40%, depending who you talk to and whether you believe the US data or the European data. We published a paper, it showed that it was 36.1% was the right rate. And the total error rate may be as much as 2/3 because you have a false positive rate in addition to the false negative rate. Lab names are non-standard in most people's systems, and so people don't use LOINC when they should. And so often when you're combining data, this can be a real problem in terms of getting the right data to the database so that you can get an honest count. And then there's splitting one's patient records into two research IDs. So if you have two John Smiths, you can't prove they're exactly the same person. Maybe you'll give Maybe they have two different research IDs, one for each practice plan that they go to, and you may split them in your database into two separate people instead of combining their data. That could lead to off counts and bad results as well. And I've seen that happen in our region. When merging records from multiple organizations, data can be split like that. So not knowing that a patient has died also increases the false positive rate. In our database for a while, we had people who were 160 years old. Either we didn't find out that they passed or were giving the best care ever. I'll let you guys decide. So using unreliable data to generate reliable results, this just doesn't work. If you put garbage in, you get garbage out. Know your data. Do as many cross-validations as you're able to understand if a fact is true. So, for example, if someone has an ICD-10 code for diabetes, that doesn't necessarily mean they have diabetes. If it's in their record too, that helps. If they're on insulin, then you're pretty sure. If they have a high hemoglobin A1C, now you got a diabetic and you're pretty certain about it. So ICD error rates are very high, and there's a lack of interoperability in the way that we store data between data systems. Often people are getting data now from EHR companies, and they won't give you the data schemas or how they handled it or the data provenance, which is everything that happened to the data from start to finish. And that makes it hard for people to, at least for me, to trust the data. When you put identified data on mobile devices, you have certain responsibilities. The first thing you should do is ask yourself, do I need this data on this device? And if not, don't store it on the mobile device. If you do, then encrypt the data with a strong password. Do not store the password on the same device. Put it in a separate device. Report any loss of the device immediately. If possible, scrub the identifiers prior to loading the data onto the mobile device. Know where your device is at all times. And do not use the same device for other purposes, like family pictures and social things. So what are best practices? I started telling you about bad practices. Let's start with some good practices. Well, first, we're going to talk about HIPAA de-identification, then using trusted brokers. And this is where we have two people required to release identified data, either for IRB approval or a public health emergency from an authorized public health agency. Encryption, firewalls that inhibit hacking, and two-factor authentication, which we have at UB. And we'll talk about fair data principles, data-driven recruitment to clinical trials, e-consenting, electronic data capture for clinical trials, case report forms for clinical trials, adverse event reporting, and then results reporting in general. So fair data principles include F for findable. Metadata are assigned a global, unique, and persistent identifier. Data are described with rich metadata. Metadata clearly and explicitly include the identifier of the data it describes. Metadata are registered or indexed in a searchable resource. To be accessible, the A, data are retrievable by their identifier using a standardized communication protocol. The protocol is open, free, and universally implementable. The protocol allows for authentication and authorization procedure where necessary. And the metadata are accessible even when the data are no longer available. This is very important so that you have pointers to how this metadata got there. To be interoperable, the data must use a formal, accessible, shared, and broadly applicable language for knowledge representation, such as ontology. That the metadata use vocabularies that follow the fair data principles. That the data include qualified resources to other metadata when that's applicable. And then the R is retrieval or reusable. So reusable data, the metadata are richly described with a plurality of accurate and relevant attributes. The data are released with a clear and accessible data use license. The data are associated with detailed provenance. The data meet domain relevant community standards. And this is what constitutes the fair data principles. So HIPAA de-identification, there's really two ways of doing it. There's the expert determination and the safe harbor. Before we get into it, I'll tell you that the safe harbor is what everybody uses. The expert determination actually destroys your data. It applies statistical techniques so that it can't be re-identified. By then, your data is not useful. And in this, I won't spend a lot of time on the first one because it's basically a statistical technique to take out enough data it can't be re-identified. But the de-identification from the safe harbor method are the following identifiers need to be scrubbed. Names, all geographic subdivisions smaller than a state, including street addresses, county zip codes, and their equivalents, except for three-digit zips, which is okay only if that three-digit zip has more than 20,000 people. The three-digit zip for all such geographic units containing 20,000 or fewer people is changed to 000. All elements of dates except year need to be gone. Of course, this hobbles a lot of research and can't be done, and so we'll talk a little bit about limited data sets as well. And anybody over 90 needs to be, or over 89, 90 and all gets to be 90 and older because you really don't have enough people in the category, and you could start to identify people that way. All telephone numbers, vehicle identifiers, serial numbers, including license plate numbers, fax numbers, device IDs, serial numbers, email addresses, URIs, social security numbers, IP addresses, medical record numbers, biometric identifiers, including finger and voice prints, now face features as well, health plan beneficiary numbers, full face photographs and any comparable images, account numbers, any other unique identifying number, characteristic, or code except as permitted by paragraph C of this is presented in the re-identification, and then certificate or license numbers can't be in there. Now, when you've already de-identified it, you can put back a research ID that connects the people, and we'll talk about how we do this in a second. A limited data set most commonly is where you retain zip codes and you retain dates, because it's really hard to do research without those things. And those still are considered HIPAA data, even though they have none of the other identifiers, and need to be treated with the same kind of cautions that you would treat people's social security numbers. So the way we do this in practical life is through a trusted broker design. The data is de-identified. A research ID, which is allowable by HIPAA, is given to the research data. And the table is created on the clinical system, linking the crosswalk between the real ID for the patient and the research ID. This crosswalk table never leaves the clinical system. The crosswalk table is encrypted and secured, and it takes two people to break the seal on the crosswalk table in two legitimate circumstances. One with access to the file, one of the people has access to the file, and the other has the password to encrypt the data. So this could be through IRB approval or a public health emergency with a request from a bona fide public health agency, as we said. So it takes the NSA about 24 hours by brute force to break a 48-bit encryption key. NSA has more compute power than anybody else in the country. That includes Google and Microsoft and others. And the standard for encryption of health data is 256-bit encryption. For a while, they didn't allow this to be shipped out of the country because they thought terrorists would encrypt their messages and health data. But they decided that the benefit of securing health information was more important than stopping the terrorists. Today, we encrypt our drives without slowing them down sufficiently because the encryption decryption techniques are actually pretty fast. And today, you can not only encrypt a drive, but you can encrypt individual files, which is even faster. The goal is that the cost of decryption by brute force methods is greater than the value of the data to someone trying to do so. In some really high value people, like the President of the United States or other things, it may be worth the effort for people to go through. And so extra steps need to be taken in those circumstances. And the other thing that we use a public key, private key infrastructure, or symmetric key or private key. And the way this works is that you have a public key and and you have a private key. So if I was going to send a message to one of you, I would take your public key and my private key and I would encrypt it. And then I'd send it to you and you'd use my public key and your private key to decrypt it. And this is a very strong method of encryption. Unfortunately, this is also what uh, the principle behind ransomware attacks is, where they put a virus on your system and it encrypts your data, and they want you to pay them some bitcoins in order to get the decryption key back. That's happened actually here. Um, so firewalls, they inhibit hacking. They inhibit unauthorized people from getting into the servers that they're not privileged to access. And there's a dual role method. So you know a user ID and password to access the site, and having your IP and port address on the inclusion sheet from that site. So in other words, you don't actually, if you're not coming from a place that this machine recognizes, even if you have the user ID and password, it won't let you in. Having a list of approved sites that your equipment can access by IP and port addresses cuts down on the people who can get in. My understanding is every second UB gets a hacking attempt by China, somewhere in China, every second. So we try not to do that. So we use two-factor authentication. Most of you who are with UB know this already. Requires two methods, so input of data and access to data. For example, could be a physical token, or it could be a password, or it could be, an application on your phone, and your device is well known to the application that's using it. Um, know who is the person storing the data, know who's accessing the data, and I avoid identity theft reaching your data. So you can see that people are trying to reach through your computer and take your credit cards and everything. One of our congressmen had this outside his office. So this is all about being the power of data. This is the actual ransomware attack that notice that ECMC got when we had a ransomware attack at ECMC. They asked for uh, 24 bitcoins at the time. 24 bitcoins were worth about $30,000. Instead, they decided they wouldn't give in to the terrorists, and they deleted all their data, and they ended up spending $10 million, and they had 5 different attempts, and they ended up losing 6 months of data, which they partially populated back from Healthy Link, but it wasn't perfect. Sometimes the right thing to do is pay the ransom, believe it or not. They had one thing they did. One of the doctors had a laptop at ECMC, and he'd gotten the same thing, and he paid the Bitcoin because he had a lot of important stuff on his laptop. And he gave the decryption key, which worked for him, to the hospital. They tried it, and it's came up with a skull and crossbones and started deleting all their data. That was not a good result. So, can anybody tell me who this patient is? Probably not, right? So this is a list of extracted codes by NLP of a particular person's patient record. And it's my philosophy that we are better off exchanging rather than the text of people's records, exchanging this kind of data. It has everything in it you need to do research, but it doesn't have any of the non-HIPAA identifiers, like, the captain of the Bills football team, or um, the president of M&T Bank, or the wife of the president of M&T Bank, right? All those things are very identifying, but um, they're they're non-HIPAA identifiers and wouldn't be scrubbed in a normal HIPAA identification cleaning. So at the CTSA, we try to have interoperable data, and that requires physical interoperability, platform-based interoperability, standards-based interoperability, and application-based interoperability. This includes data-driven recruitment to clinical trials to try to fill trials more easily, and that can be including encrypting and encoding the inclusion criteria for the trial, the exclusion criteria for the trial, and the critical question being asked so that others can use it. This is a study we did. We have a tool called the BMI Investigator, which people use to do research. And here's a study that we did that took 5 minutes. It's a smart clinician came into my office and said, I think my patients who have rosacea are more likely to have obstructive sleep apnea. And so what I did was we looked in the database and saw if it was true. And we were able to get the information in about 5 minutes, and it gives us immediately a breakdown of race, ethnicity, gender, and age. And um, and it came up with the fact that, yeah, it turns out it was 3.4 times more likely. So we did something a little more difficult, which was we looked at whether if you get the flu shot and it misses, does it give you partial protection or none at all? I've asked ID docs all over the country this, and they split 50-50 on the answer. But we chose to answer the question by looking at the rate of complication of influenza, which is pneumonia, and we accounted for Pneumovax, which is the streptococcal vaccine. And what we found was that the actual answer was exactly the same. So the rate of pneumonia in flu, if you got the vaccine or you didn't get the vaccine, was the same if you did get the flu. So in terms of your chance of getting the flu, if your shot misses, it just misses. So then we thought we'd try something a little more difficult where we said, okay, you've got these people who are smokers and have pneumonia and the flu. How often were they told not to smoke, to quit smoking? And it was only about 2/3 of the time in the record. And so we put in place policies to try to get people to be taken off that. Oh, this is the sleep apnea study. So here was the rate with rosacea. Without rosacea, it was 8.8%, and the chi-square is very highly positive, 3.4x, and the number needed to test was only 12. So everybody with rosacea should be asked the screening questions for obstructive sleep apnea. And there was nothing at that time in the literature. Now there's our article. So e-consenting, getting more and more, we can get data from patients to do clinical trials. There's real world evidence trials. And what we need for that is electronic consentings so that we can pass that to Smart on Fire connections and start to understand what the ways to recruit patients at a distance are to our protocol and get their data for both the inclusion exclusion criteria and also for the follow-up visits from their own EHR rather than have to have them come here. So now even a small, place like Buffalo can do clinical trials all over the country. So informed consent is a process, not just a form. Information must be presented to enable persons to voluntarily decide whether or not to participate as a research subject. It's a fundamental mechanism to ensure respect for persons through the provision of thoughtful consent or for a voluntary act. The procedures used in obtaining informed consent should be designed to educate the study population in terms that they can understand. Therefore, informed consent language and its documentation, especially explanations of the study's purpose, duration, experimental procedures, and everything is a procedure in clinical trials, alternatives, risks, and benefits, must be written in lay language, understandable to the people being asked to participate. The written presentation of the information is used to document the basis for consent and for the subject's future reference. The consent document should be revised when deficiencies are noted and when additional information will improve the consent process. Um, Use of the first person I, understand that, can be interpreted as suggestive and may be relied upon as a substitute for insufficient factual information and can constitute coercive influence over the subject. Describe the overall experience that will be encountered. Describe the benefits that the subjects may reasonably expect to encounter. Describe any alternatives to participating in the research project. The regulations insist that subjects be told the extent to which their personal, identifiable private information will be held in confidence. If research-related injury happens, physical, psychological, social, financial, or otherwise, is possible in the research and is more than minimal risk, an explanation must be given of whatever voluntary compensation or treatment will be provided to the subject. Note that regulations do not limit injury to physical injury. The regulations prohibit waiving or appearing to waive any of the legal rights of the subjects, and the regulations provide for the identification of contact persons who would be knowledgeable to answer the questions of the subject about the research. Rights of the subject and research-related injuries, these three areas must explicitly be stated and addressed in the consent process and documentation. And there must be a statement saying that that participation is voluntary and they have the right to withdraw at any time. So electronic data capture systems take in the data from the patient during the study, and they account for the user's perspective, so they should be built with user-centered design. As they are the data collection method, they must be referenced in the IRB, and new forms should undergo usability testing. So if you change it, you have to retest. Data types and question types should match your IRB approval. Questions should be codified in a standardized codifying system. Possible answers should be codified in a standard coding system. And then groups of questions that have been validated cannot be necessarily be delinked or reused, as they may not have the same reliability if no longer linked together. And there's two parts to electronic data capture. There's the usefulness, which is the utility, and there's the usability. Is it easy to learn, efficient to use, easy to remember, few errors, and yes, subjectively pleasing. The more it's subjectively pleasing, the more you'll invest in knowing how to use it, and the more it'll be a point of pride in your work. So these case report forms are filed when unanticipated problems arise in the research. Could be a data breach, could be an adverse event, any of those things. This is an example of a babesiosis form that the CDC uses, so you can get a sense that they're extensive. And here's an example. I won't read this one to you either. So if it's reasonably possible that you could imagine the side effect happening, you should inform the patient or the subjects of it before they agree to the study. Okay, adverse event reporting. And adverse events if one or more subjects have a problem, and you ask yourself first, is the adverse event unexpected in nature, severity, or frequency? If it is the adverse event possibly related to the participation in the research? And you can see you fall off if you answer no to any of these. Does the adverse event suggest that the research places subjects at higher than normal risk of physical or psychological harm uh, that was previously known or recognized? And if this event is serious, the answer is yes, always by definition, even if you don't think it's um, something that you have told them before. So you need to report it on 45 CR Part 46. So results reporting. Always publish your research, your main outcomes, even if they didn't work out. And if you're publishing a sub-study because you got positive results in your sub-study, also publish the main conclusions because it's just not fair to the readers to not know what you are powered to conclude. Never let your conclusions extend beyond your data. So your conclusions, in the discussion, you can postulate, but in your conclusions, you need to stick to what your data has shown. Make sure that your methods, results, and abstract and conclusions all match the breadth and content of your study. So if you think about it, we are increasing our publication rates left and right. And so there's always the chance for people to use this badly. Um, People are using ChatGPT and GPT-4 Omni to generate papers, and now all of the journals that I'm aware of ask you if you used an AI in your creation of your paper. OpenAI has been seen as an agent of plagiarism as well, and there because all the stuff comes from the web, so somebody said it before in one way or another. But I don't think that's exactly true. I think there's getting new methods of reasoning in these that are maybe extending the capability. So the CTSA is all about translational science and translational and informatics science, and studying methods to improve our ability to recruit to clinical trials is part of that. Studying novel informatics methods to improve clinical trial recruitment, studying methods to improve uh, collaboration and mentorship, studying novel methods to improve. So not only do we use methods that we have, but studying novel methods that we create, and then methods to follow educational outcomes of new informatics and data science tools, and then the ability to implement this to get real world evidence and to uh, design to capture clinicians' ideas that used to stimulate bench research. So there's a lot of deep fakes out there. You can see them everywhere. And obviously, these are even bring back people who are not alive. And it's getting so you can't tell what's true and what's not true. This is a cat. You can see the cat. And what you're doing is you're adding noise to the cat's picture. And on the other side, you're learning how to denoise it. And that's basically the basis upon which all of these deep fakes are happening. So you're taking this, you're taking somebody who moves in a certain way and you're superimposing them and getting the deep fake to happen. So here's an example. Here's me. I'm a human. Go through a generator. This is what the generator thinks I look like. It goes through a discriminator and iterates back and forth, gets a little closer to me, and then eventually it gets to a good model. Then it can put me wherever it wants in a sunset or wherever. In our department, we use ontology for knowledge engineering, and that's the basic. We use the basic formal ontology as our upper level ontology, which is a scientific ontology, and the ontology of general medical sciences as our domain ontology. And then we use SNOMED, LOINC, and RxNorm as the detailed ontologies underneath them. And we've built sentences out of that, which become knowledge graphs and graph embeddings. including medical literature and knowledge bases such as Medline Plus and clinical guidelines and other things that we have, uh, um, which are authoritative, drug databases, toxicogenomic database, that kind of thing. And my PhD student, Sarah Mullen, who now works over at Roswell Park, she did a study where we looked at opioid outcomes, including overdose and death events. And we looked at it with and without pre-trained embeddings, and we were able to show that with the medical knowledge that they did better, and that even when we put in bad data, injected bad data into the system or removed data from the system, that the model with the pre-trained embeddings degraded more slowly. And then all of a sudden, large language models hit, and these are highly accurate at a wide range of tasks. They're not specific enough to be an expert in any one task. They have no underlying semantics, and they're expressed as chatbots. The concerns in education are plagiarism and confabulation. Concerns in research are fake data, and LLMs cannot be authors as they can't take responsibility for their content. Um, and then concerns in practice are patient harm from misinformation and poor usability. So we did a study that's coming out in JAMA Network where we that'll be published on April 22nd. Basically, we took the USMLE questions, which are the licensing exam questions for physicians in the country, and there's 3-step exams. And we took each of them and we parsed them with our NLP, and they came up with vectors, and we had a set of we built our own large language model, and we used that in order to feed into a pipeline that led into the llama models. We tried different llama models in doing this and compared the efficacy in a comparative effectiveness study. Um, and another way to look at that, I put into an open AI generator, semantic clinical artificial intelligence, or SKY, which is what we call this. And they thought this woman was or this robotic woman was what came out of that name. Anyway, that you take the question, you parse it into codes, you take the codes, and you come up with a set of semantic triples which get fed into the llama models, and then we get answers. And here's an example of a case where the baseline model got the wrong answer. It's a 24-year-old recent college graduate who comes to the office because of a 3-year history of increased frequency of urination and occasional incontinence whenever she travels. She says she has urinary symptoms that begin typically a few days before she's going to fly. They stop after she arrives at her destination. She says she gets anxious about flying, and she reports having similar but milder symptoms prior to exams before graduating. Medical history is unremarkable. Her medications are only oral contraceptives. Vital signs are normal. Physical exam it discloses no abnormalities. Urinalysis and urine culture are normal. Uh, which of the following is the most appropriate next steps? And you have possible answers here, which you can read. And the LLM put out the reassure the patient that her symptoms will resolve in time, which is wrong. And then when you do it with the semantic clinical AI pipeline, and you put in all these facts about medicine, then the answer becomes the correct answer. Recommend behavioral therapy, which is what this woman needs, really. So here's the actual results that'll come out in the paper. And they showed that made a big difference in almost every category in the in the model. Now the model, but comparing the 70 billion and the 405 billion parameter of llama models was not significantly different. So we picked one that we could run on our equipment, and we implemented the 70 billion llama model with and without the retrieval augmented generation. And here's the URL for that, which you can play with if you want. Um, and I probably could put it in the chat at the end if people are interested. And we're using this now to improve undergraduate medical education and see if we can get our students do better on the USMLE tests. We're working with the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges group on information resources, to see if the model will be able to screen per people for medical school, so they can cut down the number of applicants that they really need to consider giving an interview to. And then we're making this available for clinical trials in collaboration with our team. We offered it to Jamaica to improve clinical care, and we're in discussions with them about starting that. We've had several meetings, and that's going to be fun. And we're making it available to the Department of Veterans Affairs to use as well for their purposes. We believe this will help a clinician practice at the top of their license. One of the things that you didn't see, I didn't present it, but the on the third step exam, which is the one they take in their internship, it is the most clinical of the exams. We got 95.2%, 95.1% correct, which is much better than GPT-4 Omni, which was 90.5%. And so this is probably the most accurate health large language model that there is. So I'm on the FDA's Digital Health Advisory Committee. It includes both the charges to do pre-market approval and post-market surveillance. And we suggested, and they're implementing, that they create model cards like nutrition labels that'll be available to anyone who wants to use an AI model. Include the train. It should include training population, the methods that are used, all the evaluation criteria, and how they performed on that evaluation and what the outcomes were. We need to ensure that AI models are safe and effective, and we want patients to be able to get access to the model cards as well as the doctors that have a choice of whether they want to use them at night or not. So I have some questions to ask you. Do patients have the right to know if an AI is used in their care? And I've actually given this question to lots of audiences, and almost everybody says yes. But here's one that's interesting. Do patients have the right to have an AI used in their care? Most people say, well, they have a right to suggest to their doctor that they use it, but do they have a right to have it used? Do they have a right to force the doctor to use this if we know that it does better than doctors on average? It's an interesting thing. I don't know the right answer, but it's worth debating. Should there be a clinical informatician between an AI and a patient to do interpretation or take responsibility for the advice, like a cardiologist for echocardiograms or a pulmonologist for pulmonary function testing, for example? So this is the Gardner hype cycle, and we are right up here, and this is where uh, people are worried about going into what they call the valley of death with AI. And I think the way to come across so that we don't go into the valley of death is to do high level functioning studies. So that includes studies such as, randomized prospective control trials, comparative effectiveness trials like ours and others that are coming out that are really quite important, I think, and will help us get toward real utility of these in the practice of medicine. So my department gives a free data science boot camp every year. It's easy to sign up for on our website, and we and if you go to my department's website, you can find the boot camp under educational opportunities. This is the schedule for this year, and some of you in the audience are teaching in this program, I saw. So those of you who are not, it's a skills building workshop. Use Jupyter notebooks in order to learn skills, put fingers to keyboard and learn things. And it's very useful if you ever want to do your own data science. And this is taken by people all over the country. Last year we had 46 institutions uh, and a bunch of the NIH people who came to take the course. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Translational Research. Please think about submitting to our journal with your high-impact work. We appreciate it. And I just wanted to close this part, then get to a discussion phase uh, with one of my favorite quotes is by Peter Drucker. The best way to predict the future is to create it. Come create the future with us. So these are fictitious cases that I want you guys to do. So, and I will call on you if you don't answer immediately. So this is from Socrates. Strong minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and weak minds discuss people. That is a good sentiment for today. All right. Who wants to read this case and then somebody else will answer it? Who can I get to be the reader?
I'll read it.
Okay, thank you, Cindy.
A young researcher is analyzing identified data from a clinical trial on her laptop, which she carries in her backpack. She always keeps her backpack carefully protected. She stops to go out to dinner with a friend, and she locks the backpack in the trunk of her car. After dinner, when she comes back to her car, the trunk was broken into and her backpack with the laptop is no longer present. Question 1, she had 430 patients in the registry. The laptop was unencrypted and therefore she must report the breach. Or these are answer choices to the study in the newspapers. 2, she had 430 patients in the registry. The laptop was encrypted, so she did not have to report the breach to the study and the newspapers. 3, she had 230 patients in the registry. The laptop was encrypted, so she did not have to report the breach to the study and the newspapers. 4, she had 260 patients in the registry. The laptop was unencrypted, so she had to report the breach to the study, but not to the newspapers.
All right. Does somebody want to answer the question? What's the right answer?
The laptop was unencrypted and had to report the breach to the study, but not to the newspapers. I can't see any reason why a researcher in and of themselves would need to report anything to the newspapers.
Oh,
But
if they have more than 500 people, they have to report them to the newspapers. Yeah, the breach has to be reported. That's what you have to do. Yeah. So if it was 500 people, then you're required to report it to the newspapers and have your picture will be in there, plus probably the chair of your department. It's a bad thing.
So someone else is saying 1 as well.
No, this was 4.
Okay, well, someone is saying 1 in ours,
Ah,
in the chat.
okay. So the reason that isn't correct is because you need 500 people to report it to the newspapers, just so you know. All right, just so you're good, let's kind of go
So the
on.
correct answer to this one is what, just to make sure everyone knows?
4.
Thank you. So everyone 4 for this one.
All right, who wants to read this one?
I can read it.
Thank you, Jordan.
John is a research assistant and his boss asks him to provide the study data. He is a member of the study as approved by the IRB and has access to the data. However, he has class and cannot take the data to his research mentor, who is working at his office across the street. He puts the data on a USB drive or thumb drive, asks his fellow student, Doug, who is not in that class and is not part of the study team, who is willing to take the drive over to his mentor in the next building. Doug does not look at the data on the drive and delivers it to the professor in the next building who thanks him. Number 1, as Doug did not look at the data, there was no data breach. Number 2, as Doug is a student in the same department, there was no data breach. Number 3, Doug is guilty of a data breach only if he copies and sells the participant's social security numbers to an identity theft ring. Number 4, Doug is guilty of a data breach and it must be reported. Number 5, John and Doug are both guilty of a data breach.
All right, who wants to answer this one?
We're getting people in the chat saying 5, more than 1.
So is someone going to open their mic and take a chance?
I think some people are just putting it in the chat. Some people may not have access to a microphone at this time.
Oh, okay. Well, who is the person? Can you read off their name?
So Sarah and Tarby. Both say 5.
Okay. I'd like to know, do you want to put it in the chat why you think that's correct?
I can answer.
Okay. Go ahead, Deb.
I think it is number 5 because Dog is not part of the study and he's not participating in it in any form or shape. And John based giving the drive to him just basically solely on trust. He could easily have looked at the data without John knowing. So I think it is a breach of the data.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So when John handed the drive to Doug, he breached. And when Doug accepted the drive from John, he breached. And it doesn't matter if nobody ended up getting hurt, it's still a data breach. And so you should understand that, and they're subject to HIPAA penalties if caught. Okay, good job, everybody. All right, who wants
I
to
have a
read this?
question.
Sure.
Is that even the case that the Doug like had no idea what was on the thumb drive?
Yeah, that's right. So don't ever accept something from somebody if you don't know what it is, because you could be in trouble. It's sort of like ignorance of the law is no excuse, kind of a thing. Where if you do it, it's the act that got you in trouble, not the your intent. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, these things are not necessarily intuitive. All right, who wants to read this one?
I can read this one.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, so a researcher is combining data from 2 hospitals. Hospital A is an academic center and Hospital B is a community hospital. The researchers merge the common patients and merge the problem lists, noting exact matches between the 2 institutions. After electronically merging the data, the researchers ask, on average, how many problems do patients have on their problem list in the merged database? And then the answers are, the researchers report 12 diagnoses as they count every line. The researchers report 11 diagnoses as they had 1 exact match, which was returned. They report 6 diagnoses because they can ignore the data from the community hospital. They report 7 diagnoses because they cannot match LVSD, NYHA class 3 exactly with CHF. And then lastly, they will get the wrong number to report in their research study, and that can affect their conclusions. The publication will later have to be retracted when another team reanalyzes their data.
Okay, who wants to take this one? Is this a little too close to home? Zach, can I call on you?
I think it depends on how exactly are they reporting their data. I think it ends up being that the fact that there's 2 different systems and there's 2 different ways of reporting things makes the data complicated. And the closest is probably going to be 5, depending on what they do. Now, clearly, they could do something and say that the study was limited by this, and describe the issues. But
Catherine, how do you get 5?
I get 5. They get the wrong number because when I look at the other ones, there are some potential. There are a lot of overlap between the 2 of them. And so 12 doesn't quite fit because there is overlap. There's 1 exact match, but there's other ones that are likely to be matches. So 11 is probably not going to be the right answer. 6 diagnoses, you can't just ignore the data from one of the hospitals if you're going through the whole point of merging the data. 7 diagnoses doesn't quite fit because if you can't merge LVSD NYHA class 3 with CHF, then you also can't merge complicated AFib with RVR with AFib or exercise-induced asthma with asthma because those are other things that could be issues. So of the options available, 5 is the only one that I can't rule out, even though that's not necessarily, there's ways to get around it, basically.
So which 5 are you going to take? There's 6 there on each
Oh,
list.
I didn't mean numbers. I meant option
Answer
5.
5. Yeah.
Answer 5.
Oh, answer 5. You're going to get the wrong number no matter what.
You're
Okay,
going to get the wrong,
so
it's
what?
of the
Yeah.
options you have, you're going to get the wrong number. So if you want to
So
do something like this, you're going to have to mention in your study that this is a significant limitation or have a way to either have larger groups of categories, essentially.
so if you see a flaw like this in your data set, um, there is a way to reconcile this, and that is through problem evolution. So, for example, it's not unusual that an academic center will have more specific diagnoses than a community hospital will. That's a common thing. It happens all the time. Or a subspecialist versus a generalist. I mean, that's another way to think about it. But anyway, with problem evolution and with more information from the chart, you can sort out which of these things are two different problems and which of the things are just a um, a subtype of the other. Like, you know, like the CHF, maybe one episode of the New York Heart Class 3 left ventricular systolic dysfunction happened, but that's not their normal state, and they have CHF on their problem list, but they had a bout of worsening heart failure, which led to this, and then they were put on treatment and they got better, with ACE inhibitors and other things and diuretics. Maybe that's the state they're in all the time, and it sticks as a problem, and it's really one problem. Same thing with AFib, with rapid ventricular response. It could be an episode, or it could be that the person's really having trouble, and that's what their problem is. And so the same thing with exercise-induced asthma. It could either be a separate type of asthma, and they may just have regular asthma too, or it could be the fact that their asthma is really just exercise-induced. The only time they get it is when they exercise. And so all of these things, and I could, go on and on with the other ones as well, but you need more information. That's the right answer. And so you need more information to sort this out. And so when you're starting to look at your data and you're getting data from multiple places, you're going to have to think about what you need to do to reconcile the veracity of the data in whatever form it comes in as, by getting as much cross-validation as you can and by trying to understand the temporality. So when one thing happens compared to when the other happens. And that can help you sort it out. Not an easy one, right? Thank you. Great job. Okay, so I just want to go through a few conclusions with this. The first is always encrypt your research data. Never send a password in the encrypted file together. Always send it in a separate document. Do not write password in the message you send a password. Scraping programs will find that, or a P word or a PW or any of those things. Use a trusted broker methodology wherever possible. Take time to understand your data. Do not report false results. Do not let your conclusions extend beyond what your research data is showing you. Remember your HIPAA penalties, up to $50,000 fine per individual disclosed, and public reporting is mandatory at 500 or more patients. Avoid local PC databases wherever possible. Work off of servers. And then avoid mobile data wherever you can, whether it be a thumb drive or a laptop or whatever, and encrypt the whole drive when you use it. If you can't encrypt the whole drive, at least encrypt the file. So the responsible conduct of research requires responsible data handling. That responsible data handling involves the generation, storage, transfer, and reporting of the data. It's the clinician's license that's on the line if there's a HIPAA breach. So if somebody breaks into a building I've never heard of at Kaleida and takes that data about patients of mine, I'm still liable for it, regardless of the fact that I had nothing to do with it. I don't store the data. I don't have anything to do with anything, but the law puts it on the license of the physician. Now, they can attach other people too, so don't feel off the hook if you're not a doc. Responsible data handling is every researcher's responsibility. and that the Department of Biomedical Informatics at the University of Buffalo and the CTSA are here to help with your responsible data management needs. And I'd be happy to take questions or thoughts or anything you guys want.
And if you do not have any questions, you can feel free to leave. We thank you very much for attending the session. Thank you, Dr. Elkin, also for presenting.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good day.